Why is that old man in shackles? The question came from the back of the courtroom, whispered, not out of disrespect, but disbelief. Some looked away, uncomfortable. Others stared, unmoved. The bailiff didn't flinch. The prosecutor didn't blink. And the judge, not yet fully aware of what was unfolding before her, didn't look up. They had cuffed him like he was dangerous. He shuffled into the courtroom, chains around his ankles, wrists bound like a criminal, his spine stooped from time and war, not wrongdoing. His coat was threadbare, military green, decades old, at least 2 sizes too big. The sleeves swallowed his wrists. The collar frayed like it had been tugged too many times in the cold. Beneath the coat, his clothes hung in tired layers, stitched together from different lifetimes, a flannel shirt with one missing button, a plain gray hoodie underneath, and work boots that had long stopped keeping water out. He didn't raise his head as he was led to the defendant's table. The fluorescent lights above cast a cold, almost surgical brightness across his skin, making every line, every scar, every age spot speak a language of its own. His face was carved by wind and war and sleeping outdoors. His eyes, if you dared to look closely, weren't dull, but heavy. The kind of heaviness that no man was born with. No one said his name at first. He was only a docket number. Case 83F. City of Fairburn vs. Unknown Male. Charges, trespassing. Resisting detainment. Public nuisance. State your name for the record, the clerk said, expression flat, voice practiced, indifferent. The old man cleared his throat. A quiet rasp followed. Then came a voice, low, unsteady, like gravel under wind. Raymond Bishop. Staff Sergeant, United States Army. A ripple of sound stirred faintly in the gallery, barely audible, but unmistakable. The kind of name that belonged in a history book, not a courtroom docket. Judge Charlotte Brennan, seated at the bench, flipped through her morning files. She was known for efficiency. For cold, impartial logic. Her courtroom was strict, quiet, disciplined, just as she'd built her career to be. But something made her fingers pause mid-turn when she saw his name. Just one line in a sea of text. Raymond Bishop. She blinked. It couldn't be. She looked up. The man before her, seated now and hunched beneath the oversized coat, didn't look like anyone she had ever met. And yet her stomach twisted with a strange knowing. The kind that doesn't form in the mind, but in the bones. The prosecutor stood. Young. Well-groomed. Tailored suit. Clean-shaven confidence. Your Honor, he began, the defendant has been warned on 3 prior occasions about loitering behind McKinley's Cafe on East Jefferson. The property owner has filed multiple complaints over the past month. On this night in question, Mr. Bishop was found behind the establishment near the vent system, allegedly refusing to vacate the premises despite being told to leave. He said it all like reading off a grocery list. Trespass. Refusal. 3rd violation. Simple. But he didn't mention the temperature that night, 23 degrees Fahrenheit, wind chill in the teens. He didn't mention that Raymond wasn't loitering, wasn't panhandling, wasn't causing a scene. He didn't mention that all he was doing was huddled by a warm vent, finishing half of a ham and cheese sandwich that Jimmy Line Cook had handed him discreetly through the back door. They didn't mention that he said, please. They only recorded that he didn't move fast enough when told to leave. Did you resist the officer's command, Mr. Bishop? The judge asked, her voice steady, measured. Raymond shook his head. No, ma'am. I just asked for 5 more minutes to finish my sandwich. I was cold. Didn't mean harm. And did you threaten the officer in any way? No, ma'am. Judge Brennan studied him. Something gnawed at her. The name. That name. She turned to the prosecutor. Has Mr. Bishop had prior convictions? The young man looked at his folder. Only minor infractions, Your Honor. 2 citations for vagrancy last year. 1 for sleeping on a bench in Lincoln Park. 1 for unauthorized access to a church pantry. Brennan's mouth tightened. You mean, she said slowly, he was cited for trying to stay warm and trying to get food? The prosecutor faltered. Technically, yes. Technically. Raymond sat motionless. Not indignant. Not even surprised. This was normal for him. Does he have representation today? She asked. The court clerk flipped a page. Public defender assigned, but delayed in another hearing, Your Honor. Mr. Bishop, Judge Brennan leaned slightly forward. Would you like to speak on your behalf? He turned his head. His voice remained quiet but firm. No excuses, ma'am. Just needed to stay warm. I don't want trouble. I try to stay out of the way. She nodded. Why McKinley's Cafe? Jimmy works there. His dad used to serve with me. Desert Storm. He knows me. Sometimes he leaves food by the back door. I don't ask. He remembers. Her eyes softened. But her posture remained composed. And your service? She asked. He shifted in his seat. A flicker of something, honor, pain, memory, crossed his face. United States Army. Staff Sergeant. 2nd Battalion. Served from 78 to 98. Returned for advisory work in Iraq, 2004. Last deployment was with the 45th Infantry in Kunduz. That was when her breath caught. Kunduz. Her hands paused over the folder. Time, for a moment, forgot to move. She knew that name. Her brother's last deployment was Kunduz. April 2007. The letters. The story. The firefight. The man who pulled him from the line of fire. The man's name had been lost in translation, she thought. Or had it? She scanned the file again. In her own notes, from years ago, one line written in her brother's final letter had never left her mind. If you ever find the man named Bishop, tell him I owe him more than I can ever repay. Her eyes flickered back to the man before her. Her lips pressed together tightly. Raymond Bishop. The man her family had searched for. The man the army had claimed was untraceable after his discharge. The man whose name had faded into footnotes and military silence. He was now seated in front of her. Shackled. For trying to survive the night. She pushed her chair back quietly. She turned to the bailiff. Recess. 15 minutes. The gavel struck once. She walked swiftly into her chambers, her hand trembling as it reached for the drawer where she kept what she never spoke of, her brother's final letter, the photo of them together in dress blues, and the memory that had haunted her for years. Back in the courtroom, Raymond Bishop waited, unaware. The door to Judge Brennan's chambers clicked shut behind her, but her thoughts remained tangled in the courtroom. Her breath came shallow as she leaned against the wooden paneling, the gavel still warm from her grip. Bishop. The name hadn't meant anything to anyone else in that room. But to her, it might as well have shattered the walls around her. She moved swiftly, her heels muted against the soft carpet as she crossed to her bookshelf. Tucked between a volume on appellate review and a dictionary of legal terms was a small wooden box. Its edges were scuffed, its brass hinges slightly tarnished, but she opened it with the reverence of someone reaching into the past. Inside was a stack of faded envelopes. Letters. All from her brother, Captain Henry Wallace. He had written home every Sunday during his deployment. It was a tradition between them. He called her Char in those notes, a nickname no one had used since his death. She found the one she remembered. Postmarked April 18, 2007. Written just after the ambush in Kunduz. She unfolded the letter with steady hands but unsteady breath. Char. Yesterday, we got hit hard. Ambush out of nowhere. RPGs, small arms, chaos. We were moving with a medic convoy through the west sector. Lost 3 guys in the first minute. I caught shrapnel in my thigh trying to pull out Sergeant Hayes. But there was a man. A staff sergeant. Big guy, gravel voice. He came out of nowhere. Ran through fire like it didn't exist. Dragged me and 2 others out behind the supply truck. He got hit, too. Didn't stop. He said his name was Bishop. That's all I know. Said something strange before he left me behind cover. No soldier gets left behind, not while I'm still breathing. If you ever find that man, Char, you tell him I owe him my life. Charlotte exhaled sharply. The words cut through the years like a blade. The phrase, not while I'm still breathing, had been engraved on her brother's headstone. After the funeral, she had searched. Wrote letters to the army, made calls, and even reached out to surviving soldiers from his unit. But Bishop had seemingly vanished. No one could find a Raymond Bishop matching the details. No forwarding contact, no active VA claim. Just, gone. Until now. She closed the letter and sat at her desk, head in her hands. For the first time in years, the control she was known for began to crack. What was he doing here? Why didn't anyone know? A knock at her chamber door startled her. She straightened, wiping at the corners of her eyes. Come in. The door creaked open, and in stepped Jacob Langston, her old friend, once her fiancé. Now a partner at the city's most prestigious law firm, he looked both out of place and perfectly composed, a storm in a tailored suit. Charlotte, he said quietly. What is this? I was going to ask you the same thing, she replied, her voice calmer than her eyes. Jacob glanced at the letter in her hands, at the photo frames on her desk, at the faded army patch she kept behind glass. He had been there after Henry's death. He knew. I walked into that courtroom expecting a trespassing case, he said. And then I saw the defendant's name. Something didn't sit right. So I asked for a recess. Why are you here? She asked. Really? He hesitated. Do you remember my cousin, Marcus? He was in Henry's unit. Still wears his dog tags every day. Told me a story once, about a soldier who saved 6 lives and vanished after the dust settled. He said the man's name was Bishop. Charlotte blinked. You think it's the same man? I don't think, Jacob said. I know. He pulled out his phone and opened a photo. It was grainy, but clear enough. A soldier in dusty camo, blood on his sleeve, holding a radio in one hand while helping another man limp toward a waiting Humvee. In the corner of the photo, a patch that read, Bishop. Charlotte took a breath like she hadn't breathed in years. I need more than photos, she said. Jacob placed a folder on her desk. Military personnel file. I had a friend in DC run it when I saw his name. Took some convincing. Technically classified, parts of it. But they reviewed his record under the Veterans Reconsideration Initiative. New guidelines. Retroactive evaluations of overlooked commendations. She opened the folder. Her eyes scanned rapidly. The words lit up like a bonfire in the dark. Silver Star, pending review for upgrade. Wounded in action, Kunduz, April 17, 2007. 3 documented acts of life-saving under enemy fire. Discharged 2008, severe PTSD, traumatic brain injury. No VA contact post-discharge. Current status, unknown until recently. He slipped through the cracks, Jacob said, softly now. After the discharge, his wife left. No fixed address. Fell off the grid. Until now, she whispered. They sat in silence. Charlotte stared at the manila folder. Her brother's letter sat beside it like a ghostly bridge between past and present. I need to know something, she said. Jacob nodded. Does he know who I am? No, he replied. He hasn't connected the dots. You got married after law school. Changed your name. And frankly, he's not in a place mentally where he's making connections like that. She stood. Walked toward the window. The city stretched out below, gray and sunless. 20 years on the bench, she said quietly. You think I've seen it all. But this is something else. Jacob moved beside her. You could recuse yourself, he said. No one would blame you. I won't, she said, her voice suddenly firmer. I'm not going to let him disappear again. Not this time. He studied her face. The woman he once planned to marry, now a judge forged by grief and discipline. There are ethical risks, he warned. There are ethical responsibilities, too, she replied, eyes blazing. Especially to those who gave everything and got nothing back. Back in the courtroom, Raymond Bishop sat quietly at the defense table. His hands, still cuffed, rested in his lap. He stared at the table surface, unmoving, expression unreadable. The courtroom buzzed softly. A few spectators whispered, unsure of the delay. The bailiff stood with arms crossed. The prosecutor shuffled his notes, a frown deepening. The doors opened again. Judge Brennan stepped back in. But something about her had shifted. Her robe was the same. Her walk is still precise. But those who knew him, like Jack B., recognized the difference. Her expression was steel. But her hands? Her hands trembled slightly as they touched the bench. She sat. Took a breath. Adjusted her papers. Court is back in session, she said. Jacob stood beside Raymond. Calm. Composed. Your Honor, he began. My client has requested I continue representation. We respectfully move to dismiss the charges. Mr. Bishop was not trespassing. He was staying warm in a known safe location where the staff had previously allowed his presence. We can obtain witness testimony to that effect. The prosecutor stood. Your Honor, with respect. Judge Brennan held up a hand. He sat back down. I have questions for the defendant, she said, her gaze fixed on Raymond. Mr. Bishop. Your service record lists Kunduz, Afghanistan, April 2007. Is that correct? Raymond blinked. Straightened slightly. Something clicked in his mind. Yes, ma'am. That's correct. I was there. Were you involved in a supply convoy that was ambushed near the Western District on April 17th? Yes, he said quietly. We were moving through a side road. The IED went off. Then gunfire. We lost 3 men right away. Her voice remained composed, but her knuckles whitened. Did you pull a wounded officer, Captain Henry Wallace, from the ambush site, under fire? Raymond's eyes narrowed. The courtroom hushed. I remember him, he said slowly. Young. Brave. Took shrapnel trying to pull his medic to cover. I got to him. Dragged him out. He told me to leave him. Said to go help the others instead. The room was still. We got him on the bird, Raymond added. He made it to Germany. But I heard he didn't make it long after. Convoy hit another IED. He lowered his head. For years, he whispered, I wondered if saving him only delayed the inevitable. From the gallery, a silver-haired man in a Marine League jacket suddenly rose. That's him, he said aloud, voice cracking. That's Sergeant Bishop. I was there. He saved 6 of us that day. A wave of murmurs swept the courtroom. Judge Brennan tapped her gavel once. Not harshly. Just enough to steady the room. Order, please. She looked back at Raymond. For the first time, her eyes met his, and stayed there. Deep in those tired eyes, she saw not just a soldier. She saw her brother's last hope. The door to the courtroom creaked open again. Not hurried. Not loud. Just enough to turn every head. He walked in alone, with the calm confidence of someone who belonged everywhere, but didn't assume it. The kind of man who moved like he'd walked through heavier doors before, and always with purpose. His shoes were leather, well-worn but polished. His overcoat, dark navy, brushed the top of his ankles. He carried a slim briefcase in his left hand, but didn't fumble with it. Didn't check his phone. Didn't pause to ask a question. He simply scanned the room once and began walking straight to the defense table. Judge Brennan blinked. She didn't know his name, but her breath caught anyway. Not from fear. From recognition. His face was older now, but unmistakable. Jacob Langston. Once the best man at her brother's funeral. Once, the man who had held her hand when she couldn't speak. Once the man she thought she might marry, before grief carved a canyon between who they were and who they became. Now, he stood beside Raymond Bishop, setting down his case with practiced precision. Your Honor, he said, his voice smooth but edged with urgency, Jacob Langston, counsel for the defense. I've just been retained. Charlotte straightened in her chair. This court was not informed of new representation. It was a last-minute development, he said, unflinching. But necessary. Bishop turned to him, clearly confused. I didn't call you, he whispered. I don't know you. Langston leaned in, voice low but audible. You don't need to. My firm is taking this case pro bono. No cost. No strings. But I can't. You won't need to, Langston said again, then turned back to the judge. Brennan's eyes narrowed, but she nodded. 15-minute recess granted for attorney-client consultation. Bailiff, please escort Mr. Bishop and Mr. Langston to the adjoining conference room. The gavel struck. The murmur began. As the 2 men left the courtroom, Charlotte sat still, watching Jacob's figure disappear behind the door. She hadn't spoken to him in nearly a decade. The last time was at her father's wake. He had come late, stood quietly at the back, then left before the eulogy. No words. Just a look. But now here he was, walking back into her courtroom, back into her memory, with the very man she had once begged the military to help her find. Inside the small conference room, Raymond stood beside the window, fingers twitching at the sleeves of his coat like they didn't fit his arms anymore. The light above was too bright. The walls are too white. The silence is too sharp. Jacob sat across from him, unfolding a file and setting down a pen he didn't use. I appreciate the offer, Raymond said, finally, but I'm not your kind of client. What kind would that be? Raymond shrugged. The kind with nothing to give. Jacob smiled faintly. You gave something no one else in this room ever could. 20 years ago. In a desert, most Americans forgot about the second it left the headlines. Raymond stiffened. You know who I am. I do. I'm not looking for charity, Raymond added. And I'm not offering it, Jacob replied. What I'm offering is correction. Of a long overdue injustice. Raymond looked out the window, watching snow begin to fall in thin lines across the glass. People forget, he said softly. That's just the way it is. Jacob leaned forward. Not everyone forgets, Sergeant. Raymond flinched slightly at the title. You remember that convoy outside Kunduz? Jacob asked. Raymond turned his head, slow and uncertain. I try not to. My cousin Marcus was in that convoy. He was the one dragging the radio technician behind a flipped Humvee. You pulled them both out. Took a bullet through the thigh and didn't even notice until you reached the field medics. I did what I was trained to do. You did what most wouldn't, Jacob said. That's the difference. Raymond didn't reply. His eyes returned to the snow. You don't owe me anything, Jacob continued. But you do owe it to yourself to stop fading away. Raymond sat down slowly, the exhaustion of years weighing more than gravity ever could. You know what it's like, he said after a moment. To serve for 20 years, come home, and feel like a stranger in your own country. I remember marching in parades where people used to clap. Now I walk past them and get ignored, or worse. Watched. Judged. Jacob didn't answer. He just listened. Listened. I was a husband once, Raymond continued. I had a job. Built homes. Had regular hours, coffee in the morning, and a woman who loved me. And then the pain came back. Not just in the body, but in the head. The flashbacks. The anger. I couldn't hold a hammer steady. Couldn't sit still long enough to eat dinner. Then the company let me go. My wife left after 2 years of trying to hold me together. After that, it was a fast fall. He rubbed his forehead like it ached. Got denied for disability twice. The third time, I missed the deadline. I lost the apartment after one missed rent check. After that, I slept in my truck until the city towed it. He looked up. You ever try to sleep on concrete when your spine's full of shrapnel? Jacob shook his head. I used to think dying over there would have been easier than dying slow over here. Silence filled the room. Then Jacob spoke again, his voice softer. That's not how your story ends. Not anymore. Raymond gave a tired smile. I don't need a story. But the people you saved. The ones who never got to say thank you. They do. Jacob slid the folder toward him. Your military record. Including the commendation recommendation that was never processed. We've reopened it under the Veterans Reconsideration Initiative. Raymond blinked. What's that? It means the Department of Defense is reviewing forgotten or mishandled cases, especially from veterans who fell through the cracks. Your name came up. You were flagged for possible upgrade to the Navy Cross. Raymond flinched again. That's a mistake. No, Jacob said. It's justice. Delayed. Not denied. Back in her chambers, Judge Brennan stood over her desk, staring at the worn photograph again. Her brother, Henry, smiled in the picture, young, square-jawed, proud. He wore his dress uniform like it was sewn to his bones. And beside him, her much younger self, hands clasped in front, face full of awe. That day felt like 100 years ago. After Henry died, she turned everything inward. Into school. Into law. In control. She buried her rage and replaced it with rules. Buried her grief and replaced it with discipline. But today, in that courtroom, it all came roaring back. How did he end up in cuffs? How did we let this happen? She pulled out her phone. Typed a number she hadn't dialed in 5 years. Colonel Simmons, she said when the voice answered. This is Judge Charlotte Brennan. A pause. Then, yes, Judge. How can I help you? I need verification. Service record. Raymond Bishop, Staff Sergeant. Army. 2nd Battalion. Last known deployment, Afghanistan, 2007. Kunduz. Another pause. I'll call you back in 10. She hung up and sat down, hands trembling again. This wasn't just about a case anymore. This was about the fracture running beneath every legal document she'd ever signed. The fracture between what is fair and what is right. 15 minutes later, the courtroom came alive again. Spectators murmured. The prosecutor adjusted his tie. The bailiff opened the door. Raymond Bishop entered first. His coat seemed to sit differently on his shoulders now, still worn, still old, but no longer shrinking him. Beside him, Jacob walked calmly, briefcase in hand. Judge Brennan looked at them. For the first time that day, her expression softened. Mr. Langston, she said. Has your client made a decision? Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Bishop intends to proceed with representation. Very well, she said. She glanced down at the folder before her, then up again. Mr. Bishop, she said. When I return, there are matters far beyond this case that we need to discuss. Raymond met her eyes for a second. And some quiet knowing passed between them. He nodded once. I understand, ma'am. The sound of the courtroom doors closing behind them faded like an old echo, swallowed by polished marble and muted carpeting. Inside her chambers, Judge Charlotte Brennan didn't sit immediately. She stood beside the window, her hand pressed flat against the glass as if it could still hold off the questions clawing at her ribs. Outside, the city wore winter like a second skin, gray streets, wind-whipped flags, headlights reflecting on slick asphalt. Somewhere down there, Raymond Bishop had slept in the cold just days ago. Somewhere, he'd curled his body against the side of a building while the rest of the world passed by, eyes averted, steps quickened. And now he sat in her courtroom. She turned from the window and walked to her bookshelf. Her fingers brushed along volumes of constitutional law, judicial ethics, and federal procedure, none of them prepared her for this. She reached instead for a box tucked behind a row of legal journals. It was old, wrapped in brown ribbon that had lost its luster, edges soft with age. She undid the bow slowly. Inside were dozens of letters. Everyone is her brother. Each in his blocky, confident handwriting, addressed to Char or Sis. She knew them all by feel. Folded along different creases, they bore the smudges of desert dust, the faint scent of cheap military ink, and sometimes, the ghost of dried sweat. She found the one she was looking for. April 18, 2007. She unfolded it, smoothing the paper out on her lap. Her eyes scanned the words she had memorized but never fully understood, until now. Asterisk Char. Yesterday was hell. We were ambushed near Sector 4. The medical unit went down. I tried to pull Hayes out, but got hit in the leg. We were pinned. Smoke everywhere. Then this guy appeared. I swear, out of the fire like a damn movie scene. Big guy. Black. Solid build. Didn't even flinch when rounds were cracking past his head. He got me and Hayes out. Said his name was Bishop. Staff Sergeant. Told me, no soldier gets left behind. Not while I'm still breathing. Then he turned around and ran back into it. If you ever meet him, tell him I owe him everything. Asterisk. She sat with it in her hands. She didn't cry. Not yet. But her throat ached with unshed memory. Henry had died less than 3 weeks later. Not in that firefight, but on a routine patrol. An IED. Fast. Violent. Meaningless. There had been a funeral. A flag. A long silence in the car ride home. And afterward, a flood of words from strangers, but none from Bishop. None ever again. She had tried to find him. Letters. Phone calls. Military records are redacted or incomplete. The army said he had redeployed, then vanished. When he was finally discharged, he didn't leave a trace. No VA contact. No next of kin. And now, 20 years later, he had shown up in her courtroom with shackles around his wrists. Her phone buzzed, dragging her out of the memory. It was Colonel Simmons. She picked up, bracing herself. "Judge Brennan," the voice said. "You were right." She closed her eyes. "He's the one." "Yes, ma'am." Staff Sergeant Raymond Bishop. Assigned to 2nd Battalion, 45th Infantry. Confirmed presence in Kunduz, April 2007. Was nominated for the Silver Star, but the recommendation was caught in a backlog during a personnel rotation. It was never processed. Her voice came out tight. Why wasn't he contacted? After his discharge, Simmons explained, he didn't file VA claims. We lost track. Honestly, the PTSD report marked him as high risk. He slipped through. Charlotte gritted her teeth. He didn't slip. He was forgotten. I'm sorry, Judge. She hung up. Sorry wasn't enough. In the courtroom, Raymond sat with his hands folded tightly in his lap. The cuffs had finally been removed, but the weight hadn't lifted. Not really. Jacob Langston sat beside him, quiet, respectful, not pushing. Raymond stared straight ahead. She knew something, he said finally. Jacob glanced at him. The judge? Yeah. When she said my name, it was like she'd heard it before. Not just read it. Jacob leaned back slightly. Maybe she did. Raymond's eyes narrowed. You're not telling me everything. Jacob hesitated. Then, do you remember a Captain Henry Wallace? Raymond's breath caught. He turned slowly, eyes sharp now, like a soldier scanning a battlefield. Wallace, he repeated. Jacob nodded. You pulled him out. Kunduz. April 17th. Raymond exhaled hard. His hands trembled slightly. I remember. He was young. Had grit. Took shrapnel but still tried to pull another guy out. I dragged him behind a Humvee. He kept telling me to leave him, but I wouldn't. Jacob waited. Raymond looked down at his palms. I always wondered if saving him was pointless, he said. Heard he died weeks later. He did, Jacob said gently. But not before writing a letter to his sister. He told her about you. Raymond looked up, and the question formed silently. Yes, Jacob answered. Judge Brennan. The courtroom door opened again, but this time, it wasn't just Brennan who entered. 3 uniformed figures followed behind her, a full colonel, a master sergeant, and a young corporal with a polished wooden case cradled in his arms. Gasps rippled softly through the gallery. Raymond stood instinctively, his joints protesting, but his body obeying old muscle memory. The judge took her seat slowly, reverently. She didn't reach for her gavel. Instead, she cleared her throat and looked around the room, her voice firm and steady. Before we proceed with the case, she began, this court must acknowledge a personal connection. She turned to Raymond, her eyes meeting his fully now. The Captain Henry Wallace mentioned earlier, was my brother. A stunned silence fell. Raymond's lips parted, but no words came. My brother, Brennan continued, wrote about a soldier who saved his life in the middle of hell. He said that man had disappeared into the smoke, never asking for recognition. For 20 years, I've tried to find him. That man was you. From the gallery, the silver-haired VE. I was there, he said. I saw Bishop take 2 bullets pulling Wallace out. He didn't stop. He never stopped. Charlotte nodded to the colonel beside her. This is Colonel James Albright, she said. He has something for you. The colonel stepped forward, clearing his throat. His voice was gravelly and weighted. Staff Sergeant Bishop, he said, the Department of Defense has reviewed your record under the Veterans Reconsideration Initiative. He paused. By order of the Secretary of the Army, and in recognition of your extraordinary bravery under fire on April 17, 2007, your Silver Star Commendation has been formally upgraded. He motioned to the corporal, who opened the case. Inside sat a Navy Cross. Gasps. A few quiet sobs. Raymond stared at it like it wasn't real. Colonel Albright continued. Your actions didn't just save Captain Wallace. You shielded 6 others. Your suppression of the ambush allowed a wounded convoy to escape. Until recently, parts of that mission were classified. But now, the full record is clear. He stepped closer. This is long overdue. Raymond's lips trembled. I didn't do anything special, he said, barely audible. The colonel looked him square in the eyes. You did everything that mattered. Then, from the back of the room, a sharp voice called out. Attention on deck. The veterans stood first, straight and proud. Then the civilians followed. The gallery rose to their feet, as if pulled by some unseen force. Even the prosecutor stood, caught between protocol and humanity. And then silence again. Raymond Bishop, for the first time in decades, stood tall. Not as a defendant, but as a soldier. As a man who had been broken, and was now remembered. That night, as the courthouse lights dimmed and the city went quiet beneath snow clouds, Charlotte sat alone in her chambers. The letters lay beside her. The medal's image is still imprinted in her mind. She picked up her phone once more. Mom, she said when the voice answered. Charlotte, her mother asked. Is everything all right? There was a pause. I found him, Charlotte whispered. And for the first time in 20 years, her mother wept on the line. He hadn't cried when they gave him the Navy Cross. Not when the colonel saluted him. Not when the crowd stood up. Not even when the judge, the sister of the man whose life he had once saved, looked at him with eyes that seemed to carry every unspoken thank you from 2 lost decades. But now, standing at the defense table again, with his old military coat heavy on his shoulders and the metal case still warm beneath his fingers, Raymond Bishop's hands shook. Not from weakness. From memory. Judge Brennan had resumed her seat, posture straight as ever, but something in her gaze had softened. She didn't look at him as a defendant now. She looked at him like a witness to something that still mattered. Something America had tried to forget, but that lived on, etched into the marrow of men like Raymond. Mr. Bishop, she said clearly, her voice measured yet warm. I'd like you to answer one final set of questions. Not for the sake of these charges, but for the record. For the truth. He nodded once. Yes, ma'am. His voice was steady, but behind it was a cliffside of memory, brittle and shifting. He didn't know if the words would come out the way they lived in his head. Were you present on April 17, 2007, during the convoy ambush near Kunduz? She asked. Yes, ma'am. Can you describe what happened? He hesitated. Then, slowly, he exhaled and began. We were escorting a medical unit, 2 Humvees and a supply truck, Raymond said. Rural route. Poor visibility. Dirt roads. The IED went off. First Humvee flipped. Fireball lit up the night. Then the gunfire started. Automatic, from a ridge about 80 yards up. The courtroom was silent. Even the bailiff seemed to lean forward. I was in the rear vehicle. Our gunner was hit immediately. I got out and crawled up beside the truck, started returning fire to cover the medics. That's when I saw him, Captain Wallace. He was dragging a wounded sergeant toward a concrete barrier, but he was bleeding badly from the thigh. Still moving. Still shouting orders. Raymond paused. His eyes weren't in the courtroom anymore. They were in the dirt, under that Afghan sky. Another RPG came in. Took out the side of the truck. Wallace fell. The medic he was pulling didn't move after that. I ran to them. Fire all around. I don't even remember how I got there. It's just noise in my head. He cleared his throat. I pulled Wallace behind the barrier. He was still conscious. Kept telling me to leave him. Said I had to save the others. That's what kind of officer he was, hurt, bleeding out, and still putting his men first. The gallery was frozen. I got him to the LZ once air support cleared a path. We put him on the bird. And then. Raymond's voice caught. I turned back around. From the back of the courtroom, the silver-haired veteran, the one who had called attention earlier, stood up slowly. Permission to speak, Your Honor, he said. Judge Brennan looked at him and nodded once. He stepped forward, eyes locked on Raymond. I was one of the others he went back for, the man said. Name's Albert Monroe. Retired Master Sergeant. 3rd Armored. That day, I saw Bishop take 2 more bullets getting back to the second truck. Pulled 3 wounded out before collapsing near the rocks. He turned to the courtroom. Everyone else had pulled back by then. He was the last man in. And the reason most of us made it out alive. There was no applause. Just breathe, hold tight. Raymond looked down, the room too bright suddenly. I was just doing my job, he murmured. No, Sergeant, Monroe said. You did more than that. The prosecutor stood, shifting awkwardly. His earlier confidence now sat hollow on his shoulders. Your Honor, he began, voice quieter, while the defendant's service is commendable, I would like to clarify that our current case concerns violations of city code, specifically trespassing, resisting detainment, and repeated presence on private property without permission. His words rang flat against the emotion still trembling in the room. Judge Brennan turned toward him. Calm, but unmistakably clear. This court recognizes that the letter of the law must be upheld. But we also recognize the spirit of the law. And that spirit must include decency, context, and proportionality. She turned back to Raymond. Why that cafe? She asked. Why that particular place? Raymond's eyes lifted, hesitant. Jimmy, he said. The cook. I knew his father. We served together in '91. Jimmy sometimes leaves a sandwich out by the vent. Doesn't say much. Just, remembers. A moment passed. Then, from the gallery, a young man stood. Late 30s, brown apron still tied at the waist, eyes red at the corners. I'm Jimmy, he said quietly. I left him food because my dad told me. If you ever meet Raymond Bishop, you owe him your breath. I didn't know it was this Raymond Bishop until today. He stepped forward and looked at the prosecutor. He wasn't trespassing. Not really. We never told him to leave. I never once felt unsafe. He just sat near the vent. Ate slowly. Said thank you. Never asked for anything. The prosecutor swallowed hard. I withdraw the city's recommendation for sentencing, he said, voice thin. Judge Brennan nodded. I accept the withdrawal. She looked once more at Raymond. I have one last question. He nodded. When you carried my brother to safety, did he say anything else? Raymond blinked. The memory was buried, but not unreachable. Yes, ma'am, he said softly. He said, don't let this be for nothing. Her composure fractured for just a second. A tremor passed through her hand as it settled on the bench. It wasn't, she said. I promise you, Sergeant. It wasn't. 10 minutes later, the gavel came down. All charges against Staff Sergeant Raymond Bishop are hereby dismissed, permanently. The courtroom erupted, not in claps, not in cheers, but in a collective release of breath. A room full of strangers had become a room full of witnesses. To justice. To memory. To dignity rediscovered. Raymond didn't speak. Didn't move right away. He just stood there, shoulders lifted a little higher, eyes no longer fixed to the floor. For the first time in decades, his name had weighed again, not as a burden, but as something remembered. Something that mattered. That evening, as the courthouse emptied and city lights flickered to life, Raymond found himself seated on a bench outside, his coat zipped up against the cold, the metal case in his lap. Beside him sat Jacob, sipping a cup of lukewarm coffee. You'll be receiving a notice soon, Jacob said. VA records are being updated. Full benefits. Housing assistance. Back pay. Medical coverage. Retroactive to 2008. Raymond blinked. All that? Jacob smiled faintly. All of it. Raymond didn't say thank you. Not because he wasn't grateful, but because some words are too small for some moments. He looked up instead, at the courthouse steps, now empty. He imagined Henry walking down them, laughing. A memory. A shadow. A friend. And then, for the first time in years, he smiled. Not because things were perfect. But because, finally, someone had remembered. The letter came 2 days later. It was crisp, official, with the Department of Veterans Affairs seal embossed in gold on the upper left corner. Raymond didn't open it right away. He sat in the kitchen of his temporary housing unit, quiet, Spartan, the heater hissing faintly behind him, and stared at the envelope like it was something radioactive. For 20 years, envelopes like that had meant denial. Closure. No record found. Claim insufficient. Time window expired. This one had weight. He held it between calloused fingers, rubbing his thumb over the seal like a man trying to test if it was real. Outside, snow fell again, slow, silent. Winter in the city had a way of reminding him of the desert. Not in heat or color, but in isolation. How a crowd could walk past you like a ghost. How a body could ache from silence more than shrapnel. Finally, he opened the envelope. The letter began with his name, Staff Sergeant Raymond Bishop, Ret, typed clean and bold. We are writing to inform you that your VA disability rating has been formally reassessed and corrected to reflect a 100% service-connected disability. This adjustment has been made retroactive to the date of your honorable discharge, May 3, 2008. He read that line 3 times. As a result of this correction, you are entitled to full medical benefits, housing assistance, and all federal support granted under the Post-9/11 Veterans Assistance Act. Additionally, a retroactive compensation package is being processed and will be deposited within the next 45 days. $312,471.83. That number sat at the bottom of the letter, like a boulder dropped into a quiet pond. Raymond didn't react. Not at first. He set the letter down. Walked slowly to the living room. Sat on the edge of the couch and stared at the framed photograph on the wall, a dusty image, scanned and reprinted by Jacob's firm, showing a much younger him kneeling beside a wounded soldier, rifle across his back, smoke curling behind them. The man in the picture didn't smile. Didn't pose. He just endured. Raymond looked at the image and whispered, "Well, you lasted long enough to see it." The next day, he returned to the courthouse, not as a defendant, not even for a hearing, but at Judge Brennan's invitation. He wore clean jeans. A button-down shirt that fit. A coat that belonged to him now, not passed from a donation bin. The Navy Cross pin rested above his heart, just a small glint of silver against dark blue fabric. The guards recognized him immediately. They nodded as he entered. One even saluted, awkwardly, like he wasn't sure if it was allowed. Raymond smiled gently and nodded back. He found his way to courtroom 3A. Empty now. Quiet. Just as he remembered it. Charlotte Brennan stood near the front pew, her robe folded neatly over a chair, dressed in plain slacks and a cream blouse. She looked like herself, not a judge, not a title, just Charlotte. The woman her brother had loved like a second mother. The woman whose life had once been defined by grief. "Good to see you again, Sergeant," she said with a soft smile. "Just Raymond now," he replied. "Then it's just Charlotte," she said, extending a hand. He shook it. Her grip was firm, but kind. They sat side by side in the front pew, facing the bench. The silence stretched, but it was a comfortable silence, full of things that didn't need to be said anymore. "I wanted to see this place again," he murmured. She nodded. "It holds more now." Raymond looked around. "It used to feel like a wall. Now it feels like a door." "I like that," she said. They sat quietly for another minute. "I wanted to give you something," Charlotte added, reaching into her bag. She pulled out a small wooden box. Simple. Worn. Familiar. Raymond raised an eyebrow. "These were Henry's," she said. Inside was a bundle of yellowed letters, carefully tied with twine. "He wrote home every week," she explained. "I kept them all. Most were about heat, rations, and boredom. But a few were about you." She handed one to him. His fingers hesitated, then gently unfolded the page. Char. Bishop's quiet. Not much of a talker. But the men follow him like gravity. You know how some people bark orders, and some carry them. He carries everything. The fear. The weight. The decisions. And he never makes it about himself. Yesterday, he gave me his canteen without saying a word. Then walked 10 miles through the dry zone. Never mentioned it. Just said, mission first. He's the kind of man I want to become, if I live long enough. Raymond stopped reading. His hands folded the letter again with reverence. "I never knew he thought that way," he whispered. Charlotte placed a hand on his shoulder. "He did. Deeply. You shaped the officer he became." Raymond looked away. His voice tightened. "I carried him out of that hell, Charlotte. And still, he didn't make it." "No," she said softly. "But because of you, we had 3 more weeks. 3 more phone calls. 1 last letter. 1 more chance to tell him we loved him." Tears touched the corners of her eyes. "You gave us time. That's a kind of miracle, too." Outside the courthouse, Jacob was waiting beside his car, coat open, scarf flapping lightly in the breeze. He greeted Raymond with a smile. "You look different." "Still me underneath." "Well, then, you look like you again." Raymond climbed into the passenger seat. As they drove, Jacob filled him in on the next steps: housing stabilization, medical appointments, and financial planning. His firm had assigned 2 paralegals to help process every piece of paperwork. "I won't let the system stall you again," Jacob said firmly. "We'll make sure everything's airtight." Raymond chuckled. "You talk like a lawyer." "I am a lawyer." "That explains the shoes." They both laughed, genuine, unforced. It was the first time in a long time that Raymond felt normal. Not studied. Not pitted. Not forgotten. Just seen. Later that week, a press conference was held in a modest community center. Raymond didn't want cameras. Didn't care for attention. But the local Veterans Council insisted. "A story like yours reminds people that honor isn't seasonal," the chairwoman said. "It doesn't fade because politics do." So he stood at the podium, shoulders square, wearing a suit Jacob's team had tailored for him. Behind him, the flag. The emblem of the U.S. Army. The Navy Cross is framed beside it. In front of him, rows of veterans, reporters, and civilians, some with tears in their eyes, others with quiet awe. He didn't read a speech. He just spoke. "I didn't do anything special," he began. "I did what any of us would do. I kept my brothers alive. I made sure someone went home to their family. I just never thought I'd get the chance to go home myself." He paused. "For years, I thought silence was the price of service. That you come home, and if no one remembers, you keep walking." He glanced down. "But silence isn't peace. Silence is where pain grows roots." He looked back up. "I don't need a medal to feel whole. But I do need people to remember. Not me, us. All of us who disappeared when the war was over. Who came home, but didn't really come home." A hush followed. And then, one by one, the veterans in the room stood. Not to clap. But to salute. That night, back in his apartment, Raymond opened a folder delivered by courier. Inside was his full military file, updated, corrected. Every deployment is listed. Every commendation restored. A copy of the Navy Cross citation. He read it slowly. Then set it aside. He turned instead to a box Charlotte had given him earlier that day, one last gift. Inside was a small cassette tape, labeled in block letters, H. Wallace, Final Interview. It was a recording taken 3 days before Henry's last patrol. Part of a unit morale project. Raymond found an old portable player in a thrift shop. Hooked in a fresh pair of headphones. Pressed play. And there it was. His voice. Confident. Light-hearted. Alive. "If I could say one thing to the guy who saved me that night, it wouldn't be thank you. It'd be, you made me braver than I was. Some people save your life once. Others do it every day, you try to live like they did." Raymond closed his eyes. Let the tape run. Let the words wash over the silence. Let the recognition settle into his bones. Not because it made everything whole. But it finally made him visible again. The sky over Arlington was gray that morning, the kind of solemn gray that wrapped itself around silence without needing to speak. The grass was clipped with military precision, rows of white headstones forming a perfect rhythm across the land, quiet markers for voices that no longer answered roll call. Raymond Bishop stood near Section 60, his hands folded behind his back, his coat buttoned high. A breeze moved through the trees, tugging gently at the small flags beside the markers. He didn't flinch. He had stood in formation thousands of times. In heat. In frost. In windstorms that stole breath and gunfire that stole time. But this was different. Today, he stood not as a forgotten veteran, not as a homeless man fighting bureaucracy, but as a name returned to the light. Behind him, a cluster of figures in uniform gathered near a podium under a navy blue canopy, officers, reporters, camera crews. The Department of Defense had organized a commemorative ceremony to honor posthumous and delayed awardees. His name was on the list. He hadn't wanted to come at first. When the invitation arrived, hand-delivered by a Marine major, Raymond had stared at it for hours. Not out of pride. Out of disbelief. "We invite you, Staff Sergeant, Ret. Raymond Bishop, to accept public recognition for the Navy Cross awarded for valor during combat operations in Afghanistan, 2007. He had tucked it under a book. Left it there for 2 days. It was Charlotte who finally called him. "You don't have to go for the cameras," she had said. "Go for the men who never made it home. Go for my brother." So now he stood here. And for once, he belonged. The ceremony began at 1000 hours sharp. A Marine colonel approached the microphone, voice crisp and even, reading names off a parchment scroll. Families stepped forward. Wives. Mothers. Grown children wearing ties too tight and medals they didn't earn but carried nonetheless. Then the colonel paused. "Staff Sergeant Raymond Bishop. United States Army. Operation Enduring Freedom. Awarded the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism in combat." Raymond stepped forward. No trumpet. No drum roll. Just footsteps on grass and the weight of memory in every breath. A general in full-dress uniform extended the citation. Another presented a second medal, this time mounted in a polished walnut shadow box with an engraved brass plate. The general's words were short. "This nation regrets the delay, Sergeant. It never should have taken this long." Raymond met his eyes. "I appreciate it, sir. But the men got out. That's what mattered." Applause rose. Polite. Measured. But behind it were real tears, especially from the veterans seated in the front row. Men who knew. Men who had been there. After the ceremony, a line formed, people waiting to shake his hand, to thank him. He recognized some of them. Others he didn't. A young woman approached, no older than 25, with auburn hair tied back and a tear-stained smile. "My father served with you," she said. "Sergeant Delgado. He talked about you every time we sat on the porch. Said you were the reason he came home. He died last year, cancer." Raymond nodded softly. "Your father was a hell of a soldier. And a better man." She held his hand a moment longer, then walked away. Next came a man in a wheelchair, sturdy, bald, eyes bright with memory. He wore a faded army jacket and a ball cap with the 2nd Battalion's insignia. "You pulled me out of a burning truck, Bishop," the man said. 2 tours. 30 years. No one else did what you did." Raymond didn't know what to say. So he placed a hand on the man's shoulder. Sometimes silence was stronger than gratitude. Later, in the reception tent, Charlotte found him standing near the coffee table, holding a small cup that had gone cold in his hands. "You look good in navy," she said with a smile. He smirked. "Feels strange. Like wearing someone else's memory." "No," she said. "You're finally wearing your own." They sat at a table near the back, away from the photographers, where conversation could flow without a stage. "Henry would have been proud," she said. "I think about him a lot," Raymond admitted. Not just the day I carried him out, but the look in his eyes when he told me to go back for the others. Charlotte's fingers curled slightly. He always believed others came first, even when it cost him everything. He was the best kind, Raymond whispered. Not just brave. Good. They sat in silence again. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope. This came from the archivist at Fort Belvoir, she said. They found it sealed inside Henry's last mission kit. His final will. It's addressed to you. Raymond stared at the envelope, his hands trembling slightly. He opened it carefully. The letter was short. Ray. If you're reading this, I didn't make it. That's okay. We knew the risks. But I need you to know something. You didn't just save my life, you gave me back a purpose. You showed me what it means to lead with more than rank. To lead with heart. If you ever doubt yourself, don't. If you ever feel forgotten, don't. My family knows your name. And one day, this country will too. Your friend. Henry. Asterisk. Raymond folded the letter slowly, pressing it against his chest. He couldn't speak. He didn't need to. Charlotte reached out and held his hand across the table. That night, back in his apartment, Raymond sat by the window, the city lights blinking through light snowfall. On the table beside him sat the framed Navy cross. Next to it, a small wooden box with the rest of his medals. And next to that, a photo, one Jacob had found in a military archive, of him and Henry, side by side, covered in dust, both grinning like idiots under a burning Afghan sun. He picked up the photo and smiled. Redemption didn't always come loud. It didn't always wear parades or fly banners. Sometimes, it came in the form of a name remembered. Sometimes, it came in the form of a letter never expected. And sometimes, it came when a nation looked back at its silence, and finally spoke. The apartment was small, but it was his. 2 bedrooms. 1 bath. Clean laminate floors. A narrow kitchen with new cabinets that smelled faintly of sawdust and lemon oil. A living room window that looked out onto a quiet street lined with bare-limbed trees and retired porch swings. For the first time in over a decade, Raymond Bishop had a key to something with his name on the lease. He held it each morning like a totem, turning it over between his fingers before sliding it into his pocket. Not because he feared losing it, but because it felt like holding a promise. The building was part of a housing initiative for veterans, backed by federal grants, local donors, and the relentless efforts of people like Judge Charlotte Brennan, who had fought behind the scenes long after the cameras left. Raymond's name had gone straight to the top of the list. No waiting. No more shelters. No more vents behind diners. He had a warm bed now. A door that locked from the inside. A place to hang his coat. But more than that, he had space to breathe. To remember. To forget. To rebuild. He spent his first full day inside in quiet rhythm. He unpacked the boxes Jacob's paralegals had labeled neatly: kitchen, linens, military files. He arranged the bathroom cabinet with newfound pride: aspirin, shaving cream, a brand new electric razor still in its packaging. In the bedroom closet, shirts hung with breathing room between them, some with tags still attached. On the far wall of the living room, beneath a mounted reading lamp, stood the only thing he'd insisted on hanging himself: a dark wood shadow box. Inside, the Navy Cross, his Purple Heart, the Army Commendation Medal, and a framed photocopy of the letter Henry Wallace had written, the one he never got to send. Beside it hung a photograph. Not the military archive image Jacob had found, but one that Charlotte had quietly delivered during her last visit, a photograph taken just days after the ambush in Kunduz. It showed Raymond sitting on an overturned ammo crate. His left arm was bandaged. Dirt on his boots. Eyes half closed, not from fatigue, but from reflection. Behind him, a soldier with a familiar smile, Henry, was handing him a bottle of water. They were alive in that moment. Unguarded. Human. That night, Raymond sat on his balcony, a wool blanket wrapped around his shoulders, sipping warm tea as snowflakes drifted down like ash from a long-burning fire. The city was quiet, at least on this block. Far from sirens. Far from the rhythm of feet passing him by. In this new silence, he wasn't invisible. He was resting. He looked out and thought about how strange time had become. How could it pass by you so fast that it blurred your edges? How, for years, he'd thought dignity was something you either held on to tightly or lost forever. But now he realized something far more powerful. Dignity could return. If someone believed you still had it. If someone remembered your name. The next day, the doorbell rang. It startled him. He wasn't used to being visited without warning. He opened it slowly. Standing on the threshold was a young boy. Maybe 9. Freckled. Nervous. Behind him, a woman smiled warmly. Late 30s. Auburn hair. He remembered her. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said. "But my son wanted to meet you." My father was Sergeant Delgado." Raymond smiled. "I remember." The boy stepped forward shyly, holding out a small shoebox. "I made something," he said. "For you." Raymond took the box, kneeling slightly to meet the boy's eyes. Inside was a hand-drawn sketch, colored pencil on notebook paper. It showed a soldier standing tall, sunlight behind him, a small group of people saluting in front. Above, in the shaky handwriting of a child, it read, "Real heroes don't wear capes. They keep us alive." Raymond's throat tightened. "Thank you," he said softly, pressing the boy's hand gently. The boy beamed. His mother placed a hand on her son's shoulder. "We tell him your story," she said. "So he knows what bravery looks like." They left soon after, but the box stayed on Raymond's coffee table, right beside the remote and a folded copy of the VA benefits manual he still hadn't finished reading. That sketch. It meant more than any medal. The weeks passed gently. Appointments were kept. Medications adjusted. Therapy sessions, held by a soft-spoken VA counselor named Dana, grew less tense, more honest. For the first time, Raymond talked not just about what he saw, but what he felt. The loss. The guilt. The years spent silent, not because he had nothing to say, but because he believed no one would listen. Dana did. Patiently. Without flinching. He spoke of nights spent under bridges, hearing the city breathe above him like a machine. Of days waiting in soup kitchen lines, pretending he was just between jobs so his pride wouldn't break all at once. He admitted the worst thing wasn't the cold. It was being forgotten. But now, his picture was in the local paper. His name, read aloud at public events. His story, printed in a veterans magazine with the title, "The Man They Almost Missed." He was remembered now. And that memory was healing something deeper than scars. In the spring, Judge Brennan visited again. No robe. No chambers. Just Charlotte. They sat in his living room, sipping coffee, a small radio playing Billie Holiday low in the background. "I like what you've done with the place," she said, eyes lingering on the medals. He smiled. "Feels weird, seeing them all in one spot." "Feels right," she corrected. She handed him a small envelope. "This one's not from me." He raised an eyebrow, opening it carefully. Inside was a formal letter, printed on thick paper. You are cordially invited to serve as guest speaker at the National Memorial Day ceremony, Arlington National Cemetery. Raymond exhaled. I'm not a speaker. You're a story, Charlotte said. And stories heal. Memorial Day came warm that year. Blue skies. Flags fluttering like breaths held high. Raymond stood at the podium beneath the shadow of the amphitheater arches, rows of veterans in crisp dress surrounding him, the names of the fallen etched into every marble column. He wore a dark suit. A single pin on his lapel, the Navy Cross. He didn't read from a paper. He just looked out into the crowd and said, I used to think silence was strength. Real soldiers don't speak. But silence can become a cage. I spent years thinking no one remembered. That was what I did, who I was, had been swallowed by the noise of a world that moved on. But then one courtroom changed that. One woman. One photograph. One memory. And now, today, I stand not just for me, but for everyone who came home and felt invisible. You are not forgotten. You are not alone. You still matter. Applause rose, not polite, not rehearsed, but real. In the front row, a woman cried quietly, holding the photo of her brother. A boy waved a small flag beside his grandfather. A veteran in a wheelchair closed his eyes and whispered a name from long ago. And Raymond Bishop, once forgotten, once discarded, stood beneath the sun, finally whole. That evening, back in his apartment, Raymond placed the day's program beside the photograph on his wall. He looked at Henry's face again. You were right, he said quietly. This country did remember. Eventually. He sat down. The city outside was alive again. But now, it didn't feel distant. It felt his. He picked up the boy's drawing and studied it a final time before resting it gently beside his medals. Then he leaned back in his chair, hands resting on the arms like roots finding home. And he smiled. Not because everything was fixed. But because, finally, someone remembered his name. And that made all the difference. Some heroes don't wear uniforms anymore. They walk among us, quietly, invisibly, waiting to be seen again. Raymond Bishop's story reminds us that honor doesn't fade with time, and dignity doesn't disappear with circumstance. He was a decorated soldier, a man who carried his brothers through war, only to return home and be forgotten. Not because he changed, but because we stopped looking. How many others are still out there? Sleeping on sidewalks. Eating in silence. Carrying stories that no one asks to hear. This isn't just a story about one man. It's a wake-up call. A reminder that every name matters, and every act of courage, no matter how long buried, deserves to be remembered. It's never too late to do what's right. It's never too late to look again. And sometimes, healing begins with a simple thing, remembering someone's name. If this story moved you, don't let it stop here. Like the video, share it with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe for more stories that restore faith, challenge injustice, and honor those history nearly forgot. Because somewhere, someone is still waiting to be seen.